Welcome back to Melbourne, Australia for Regional Championship 9. We're up to round 3 of our standard competition today. Still many rounds of exciting Swiss ahead, and we are seeing the full diversity of current standard in play. Here I am, Thomas Anderson, bringing you these games, and joining me, of course, is my standard expert, Kira Turetsky. Kira, we have some really spicy ones up on the feature area right now, don't we?
I am so excited for this match. We've got Orzhov Pixie and Mono Black Demons. This is going to be a really interesting matchup for these two decks, so let's head on down to the table. All right, at the table, we've got Sam Lewin on Orzhov Pixie and Magnus Mungo on Mono Black Demons. These are two incredibly, I wouldn't say popular deck lists right now, but really, really interesting for the current standard meta.
Yeah, exactly. In a long tournament like this, most players want to be on a deck that is known to be good, has proactive lines, is able to close games relatively quickly, so you have time to go and get lunch or, to check how your mates are doing. But some people are just dyed-in-the-wool grind lovers, mid-range players, Orzhov aficionados. I do count myself among their number, and either of these deck lists I'd be very happy to register. Similar in some ways, quite different in others. Obviously, Orzhov Pixie putting its best foot forward right there in the name. The identifying cards, the self-bouncing power of not only the Pixie, but now Sunpearl Kirin, really fueling a revival for the two-color version of this archetype after Esper kind of took over for a while.
And we are playing open deck lists today here for RC Melbourne. And so both players are well aware of what the other is doing. And so Sunpearl Kirin, like you said, really great to see this coming out of Tarkir Dragonstorm, really makes the self-bounce archetype run really, really well. And we're getting straight started. Magnus, turn 1 Swamp. No duress off of that one. I believe that's just in the sideboard to start with.
Actually, the Mono Black Demons deck is running a couple of duress in the main. And in fact, there's even one in Orzhov Pixie, just the one of duress to worry about. But I guess that's if not the benefit, the kind of flavor that you get from these fewer color decks, even especially the mono black deck. You have fewer slots to spend on the blue cantrips or whatever else, and you can go back to just what black purely does best, which is hand disruption through the duress, intimidation tactics now, and deep cavern bat, and then of course the really premium mid-range threats like Sheoldred the Apocalypse and Preacher of the Schism that we've been familiar with in standard for some time now, as well as this card that we've become familiar with, although unfortunately we won't have time to get familiar with on the table there. That is the Room Unholy Annex / Ritual Chamber, immediately picked off by Get Lost there. Sam has absolutely no patience for this card, it seems.
Well, and Unholy Annex is the most important card, or one of the most important cards in the Mono Black Demon archetype. That is going to be your card advantage engine in this deck. It's going to be drawing you a card, and when you have a demon on the battlefield, it's going to be gaining you life and draining your opponent out. But most importantly is going to be that card draw. Mono Black especially really, really lacking for card draw, except in cards like Preacher of the Schism and Unholy Annex. And now Sam countering with his own Unholy Annex. He says only one of us is allowed to have this on the table. And he slams down the Unholy Annex. That's going to allow him to, he's going to take 2 here and draw a card on the end step and pass back to Magnus.
So if by some chance you haven't been playing a lot of standard recently, you might not have witnessed the rooms mechanic here. It's actually fairly simple, as funky as the card looks to see in this top-down view. You can see it's a split card effectively. Both sides are enchantments. Only one of them is active on the initial cast. Both sides have independent mana costs. You can see both players leading with the 3 mana side, which is that sort of Phyrexian Arena draw engine. You lose life, you draw cards, although if you have a demon in play, you actually gain life. And then the other side, conveniently enough, produces a large demon token, which is where Magnus Mungo's deck gets its name. Obviously not the only deck making demons, but it is the deck seemingly most heavily all in on this card as its main plan. And you see Sam Lewin making an interesting play here with the Momentum Breaker.
Really smart here as well, I think. That's going to attack the hand. Momentum Breaker, a really great addition from Aether Drift into the self-bounce archetype, because regardless of whether or not it hits a creature, an artifact, it's also going to attack the hand if nothing else. Really great card to end up bouncing to your hand to play later. And again, Magnus has also got down an Unholy Annex and has drawn another one off the top, so we're really, really heavy on annexes here. No demons as of yet, so both players are going to be taking some damage from their own annexes, and Magnus is going to put a second, that's the fourth for this game, third for Magnus. We're going to put down another Unholy Annex, again, only on that card draw side, not the Ritual Chamber side.
Yeah. It's really nice of these players to immediately show us what the important card in this matchup is going to be, right? Like, just the sheer power this card offers is so devastating. Both sides of the card very effective on their own. Together, outright game winning. Then you have further synergies in both decks in different ways, right? We see a rapid exchange of cards there as Sunpearl Kieran comes down to return the Momentum Breaker, trying to offset some of that card advantage that Magnus has, and Magnus at least going to protect the life total and take away the chance of the Kieran itself being recurred, because that's really the kind of long game that yours of Pixie deck can offer, right? There's an almost inexhaustible amount of card advantage if you let the engine get rolling.
Sam is well going to activate the Ritual Chamber half of the Unholy Annex and create that 6/6 Flying Demon. So now on his end step, he's going to gain 2. Magnus is going to lose 2. He's going to draw that extra card. Now, this is definitely a match. It's really good in a way that these are, far different from the last match that we just saw. This is a bit of a slower game overall, and otherwise you'd be dying to your own Unholy Annex triggers pretty quickly. Already we're down to 12 for Magnus, 18 for Sam, and we're pretty early on into this match, all things considered.
Yeah, but I mean, both of these decks, though, they can afford to play down to a lower life total. You can see the Momentum Breaker is one of the different marginal sources of life gain. There's not like very obvious sources of life gain other than the Sheoldred, but both of these decks can recoup the life loss from the enchantment. It's obviously part of the way they're built. And in this kind of matchup that's very clearly taking on a bit of a slower pace, you're not as worried about sudden burst damage as you would be from any of the red decks in the field.
All right, Anoint with Affliction, hitting that demon token.
Lines up beautifully, doesn't it, right? You normally think of that being an early game removal spell to pick off cheap creatures like 1-drops. In this case, you take what is effectively a 5-mana demon, but because it's a token, obviously a valid target. However, the Pixie deck is the deck best able to recreate that threat over and over again. You really can't rely on just answering the demons and assuming you've dealt with this room against the Orzhov self-bounce, but Magnus continuing to have the hand pressured here. Hopeless Nightmare, the other discard incurring enchantment coming down. And this is arguably even more core to the deck. It's funny how the sort of 1-mana junk enchantment has become central to this archetype.
It's really amazing. It's a common from Wilds and Eldraine as well, but it's so effective at what it does. It causes your opponent to discard. They also lose 2 life as well, and it's just so effective and so efficient. We've got the Sunpearl Kieran coming down as well. Yet another go for the throat. So Magnus understands that these bounce elements are really vital to the deck, and so making sure that was discarded. Oh my goodness, he had to discard a go for the throat.
I mean, you can see real pieces hitting the graveyard here. Magnus obviously not going to give up much in terms of like emotional damage to the opponent, even if you are feeling in a rough position here, down to 4 life. Is there any way the black deck can get out of this?
If he has a demon in hand, and I think that's an Archfiend of the Dross in hand, if he's able to put a demon down or unlock one of those rooms, and here comes the Archfiend of the Dross, otherwise Magnus was going to be dead to his own Unholy Annex triggers on the end step, but thankfully, Archfiend of the Dross has come down. That's going to be a demon. That's going to help. Now Magnus is going to be able to start gaining life back and start turning the tide on Sam, who's going to start taking damage because Sam no longer has a demon on the field. Yeah, it's interesting how even getting that demon to stick for 1 turn can give you a gasp of new air in the matchup. And obviously, if that demon is removed, there's still a path to victory for Sam just by allowing those enchantments to tick down Magnus. But so far, it looks like that Archfiend is going to hang around. It's a sizable body as well, so you're also not in any danger immediately of being chipped out in the air. What else does the Orzhov Pixie deck have in way of reach? Do you need to get rid of this flyer to get in for lethal, or can we see the combo element of the deck almost come into play? If Sam were to have another Momentum Breaker in hand, it would eat up that Archfiend, which is really vital in this spot. Additionally, we can see on Sam's side, he's got that Soulstone Sanctuary. The activated ability to turn that Soulstone Sanctuary into a creature is going to be really important because it has all creature types. There it is. He had it in hand. That is the Momentum Breaker taking care of that Archfiend of the Dross. So clean by Sam. Not a moment of hesitation or nerves from Sam at all. He knew he was in a safe spot. So Sam now here has the ability to activate that Soulstone Sanctuary, and then will be able to then gain that life off of the Unholy Annex and put Magnus in a really difficult position. Yeah, in a situation where both players are potentially at least having to consider the life drain from their own enchantments, Sam feels in a really comfortable spot. Now running out a second copy of that room, and yeah, we're making sure that we are opening. Which side are we checking? It's the demon side, of course. It's definitely going to be the demon side there. Well, this is really precarious as well because now Magnus is going to take 4. Ooh. Yeah, so all the good work done by playing that Archfiend is erased, and now what can Magnus possibly top deck here? Deep Cavern Bat might not be the answer. There's a lot of other cards in hand, but I mean, ideally, Magnus might be able to, Magnus also playing 4 copies of Soulstone Sanctuary. It's worth noting, maybe even for future games, does have the option to help stem the bleeding from the doors that way, but in the end, forced to pay the 5 mana to unlock the Ritual Chamber and the Demon within, so creates a 6/6 token of his own.
and now just has to try and fade another removal spell. But the also Pixie deck, that's the cool part about it, is effectively so many cards Sam could have in hand or top deck represent extra copies of Momentum Breaker.
This is such an interesting game. I think we've now seen 5 or 6 Unholy Annexes at this point.
Not going to be the last of them either. Sheoldred's Edict now coming down. Cool mainboard card, able to wipe out that demon. So again, not only removing the 6/6 flyer, but also reducing the pressure from the direct damage of Sam's enchantments. Magnus trying to just buy time here, pull the resource game back in his favor, and has done so at least on the life front.
This is really precarious. There's the third Momentum Breaker as well, eating up that demon token, and that's going to be really massive for Sam in this position, because now, Magnus still has one more activation on the Ritual Chamber side, so still has the ability to make one more demon token, and still has the Soulstone Sanctuary activation as well.
Yeah, even has the other creature land, of course, so there's interesting divergence there between the Soulstone Sanctuary, obviously has great synergy with the Ritual Chamber, also permanently becomes a creature, only need to activate that the one time, so pretty good time to go for it. Obviously, it can get removed, and that's a bother, but in this position right now, the game is slow enough that having this little bit of advantage right now in this moment, definitely worth any sort of slight setback if this dies to go to the throat or something else. And Magnus going to be under even more pressure now on the life front. Has to both find another demon to, not die to his own enchantments and answer this Sanctuary.
Incredibly as well, Sam now at max speed.
Yeah, I mean, another great way to synergize with that enchantment, right? Like max speed obviously works well when you have ways to directly damage opponents. You don't need to worry about getting it in combat, and that's just what the Ritual Chamber Unholy Annex does. It's such an potent engine for these black mid-range decks.
Most importantly as well, each of those Momentum Breakers now, if Sam needs to, represents an additional 4 life to be gained.
Yeah, so that's really backbreaking, right? Because we're seeing these life totals kind of swing violently back and forth as each player is able to sort of drain life on their turn, then has their demon destroyed, the opponent produces a demon of their own. But again, Sam just has those resources in the bank. So Magnus clearly just trying to fight for board control here. Then you can start to worry about dealing some more permanent damage to Sam's life total. As we see, nowhere to run, really potent card in current standard coming down, able to answer that creature land. So again, Sam off the demons.
And what is really important here, Sam then activated the Soulstone Sanctuary. He tapped out and the Restless Fortress and sacrificed one of those Momentum Breakers to gain that 4 life. So really important in that last squeeze. These life totals are neck and neck. We are never more than really about 2 points behind one another.
Who do you rate? Like, my gut feeling would be to rate Orzhov Pixie in a sort of grindy test of resources, right? Especially where the cards that matter are permanents on the field that you can reset to hand. There's so many good draws, but it seems like Magnus is keeping up pretty well here with Mono Black.
Magnus as well has pinpointed the fact that if he can't bounce these back to his hand, the replayability is pretty much 0 at this point. There's no other real way to pick these cards back up. We haven't even seen a temporary lockdown to sweep everything back up, and then potentially even, because one of the things the Orzhov Pixie deck loves to do is sweep everything that it has under a temporary lockdown to then bounce it and regain all of the benefits off of those ETBs. That is the 4th Momentum Breaker.
I mean, again, it's one of those things where, technically that's as likely as any other random distribution of cards, but also as Magnus, you have to feel a little bit hard done by as yet more of your hard work, your momentum is broken down. And of course, the cool way that max speed works means that this new Momentum Breaker is immediately another 4 points of life that Sam mostly has on the board. You do need to keep the mana floating to activate that sacrifice ability, but a steep hill now for Magnus to climb with those enchantments in play.
Really importantly as well, Sam has tactfully left one of the Unholy Annex sides locked.
Yeah. And obviously that's not from mana.
It's definitely not for a lack of mana in that point. Interestingly, Sam here puts the temporary lockdown into the bin. Likely means he doesn't have either a Nurturing Pixie or a Sun Pearl Kirin in hand, so not able to capitalize off of the ETB effects. So into the bin we go.
Was that Duressed away?
Duressed?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness,
yeah, so,
Duressed away.
Which is also interesting, yeah. As we mentioned, the combo effect of being able to recur those Momentum Breakers even alone, let alone the Hopeless Nightmare, would be devastating to Magnus with the game in such a close position. But yeah, that's the threat that poses in the deck, and it's probably my favorite part of the current incarnation of Orzhov Pixie is how that temporary lockdown becomes an offensive weapon, even against a deck like Mono Black that isn't swarming the board with cheap creatures. And further discard coming out, this is I guess the most recent addition to Black's arsenal of hand attack, Intimidation Tactics.
Really interesting card here, because that's going to exile, which is going to end up being really important as well going forward. If Sam is looking to recur and we catch a Preacher of the Schism under a Deep Cavern Bat.
Yeah, so the hand attack coming into full force all of a sudden, Magnus kind of unleashing some of those resources that have finally appeared in hand now that the momentum breaker train has slightly slowed down. Really key to see Lauren of the third path get exiled there, so there's one of the potential answers to your opponent's annex if you are trying to take it off the board instead of hoping it kills them.
Sam is all going to activate that momentum breaker once more, so that's 8 life already gained off of those 2 cards.
Which is obviously great, but then you could also view it as like sort of an admission of weakness where Sam, despite having had a lot of play this game and clearly having resources available, as you said, hasn't even unlocked that annex yet, but in some ways seems like maybe does not feel confident to unlock the annex even with all that life in play, whereas Magnus, having been under pressure perhaps a bit more, is in a confident position all of a sudden. This bat's in play as a source of potential life gain. There's even maps to pump it up if it's not dealt with. It could even be a buffer against future sacrifice effects if you're able to recur some of those breakers. And yeah, those discard spells really finding pay dirt late in the game.
Well, interesting as well, Sam's discard hasn't been as effective against Magnus just because both of them have been able to generate so much extra card draw value from those unholy annexes. Normally when you're attacking, the hand of, say, a Gruul aggro player or even, a Jeskai control player, you're able to pretty handily get them to be out of hand more than anything else. But in this instance, both Magnus and Sam have been able to refuel their hands pretty often, putting a discard-focused deck in a pretty precarious position to having to play a little bit more offensively.
Yeah, it makes for a really interesting game where you're always trying to see like a draw to a head because every card sort of has to be useful as it's drawn. It's very much a gamble to keep any resources in hand. As we just saw, Sam, losing a card as valuable as Lauren has to hurt. But it's not as though the mana is completely free either. There's these activated abilities you have to hold up. You're potentially activating these creature lands, which is quite costly in terms of sort of immediate tempo. And the tension in these decision makings is at a peak. You can see Sam, though, having cashed in the resources now, going for a full court press. Magnus all the way down to 1 life, has to be very careful here. Not out of it yet, obviously, as both these decks have, rebounded their lives back up several times now, but perhaps we're coming to a close here in a long game 1.
Sunpearl Kirin going underneath the Deep Cavern Bat. Both players now with 2 different sets of Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber fully unlocked now as well. But interestingly as well, Sam made the decision here not to play the Sunpearl Kirin and bounce the Hopeless Nightmare back to hand and ping Magnus down for that last 2 points of damage. Really interesting line to draw there from Sam.
Yeah, it's both these players are obviously, having to reserve their mana for a lot of different causes. Now, have to be really careful because you could even die in your own end step if you, say, forget to activate a Sanctuary. There's a lot of considerations to take, but both players obviously have the reps. They're navigating this well. And here's another card we have not seen yet that could be really pivotal, especially we're talking about life gain. Kasi Revenant here for Magnus, another flying life linker. Even trades with those big demons with its death touch, and then potentially a source of, further life gain and keywords from the graveyard. So great little piece to pick up here as you're trying to preserve yourself.
Karsia Revenant, they basically printed Vampire Nighthawk, but better.
it really does feel that way. Vampire Nighthawk, it puts a Vampire Nighthawk token on another creature as well when you renew it. It is a vampire and not a demon, even though it's got that sort of funky appearance, so it will not help with the Annex requirement. But for now, that Soulstone Sanctuary is really hanging around there for Magnus.
These life totals are swinging up, they are swinging down. We had Magnus down at 1 just a moment ago, Sam up at 15. Now we are back to 10 and 6. These Unholy Annexes are really putting in a lot of work to mitigate damage, and a lot of this has been passive life gained and life loss. Really, the only attack we've seen so far is Sam attacked with the Soulstone Sanctuary once, and we've seen an attack from the Deep Cavern Bat from Magnus, but otherwise, all of this damage is coming from things like Hopeless Nightmare and damage from their own Unholy Annexes.
Yeah, you are in a white-black mirror when the main point of attacking your opponent is to restore your life rather than attempt to deplete theirs. And it just goes to show like how mid-rangey this matchup is. I mean, you can kind of argue that a mid-range matchup like this is always about getting board control, and then the life totals come after, right? If you win the battle for the board, you're going to end up taking your opponent down. But the Unholy Annex and the way it interacts with these demons and spikes your life in both directions really just makes that literal.
Sam Lewin asking to have a look at Magnus's graveyard for the moment. Wonder what he's checking for right now, probably counting to see how many extra removal spells Magnus has got left in his deck.
Yeah, as we pointed out, at this point, players are starting to really get through their deck. And
ooh, here comes a Nurturing Pixie, picking up the Hopeless Nightmare and then playing the Hopeless Nightmare again.
this is the kind of gameplay that you think of when you think of the Orzhov Pixie deck. And it feels like Sam maybe just hasn't had access to those components of the list so far, just with the way the cards have fallen for him. But perhaps now this is the way that the corner can be turned, or the last little bit of pressure can be applied again. You can't always trust the life totals. I'm so glad we don't have to fill out the traditional momentum bar for this game. But okay, the players are scooping up.
And we've scooped up.
Yeah, I mean, a 10-4 and 2 Unholy Annex triggers ready to go. Unfortunately, Magnus doesn't have a way to instantly react with something like Momentum Breaker, so that's just lethal, it looks like. And Sam Lewin, I believe, has taken game 1.
No ability to respond, unfortunately, to those triggers going on the stack from Magnus. So as much as he would have been able to capitalize off of his own Unholy Annex triggers on his turn, 2-2 is unfortunately 2 instances of that. That's game. Yeah, it's one of those interesting things about this not quite a mirror, because the mono black deck, even though Momentum Breaker is a black card, without the white elements of self-bounce in the Pixie and the Kieran, they don't have the same impetus towards playing permanent type effects. And as a result, you lose out on what is kind of the utility text of that card, but in that game came up clutch, the instant activation to gain 4 life. Both players heading to sideboard now, and again, this is an open deck list event, so both of them are well aware of what's available to their opponent in their sideboards. And what are you looking to bring in? I'm looking at Mono Black Demons, I'm looking at Magnus's sideboard, and I'm seeing a really interesting representation of the Stone Brain in here. Yeah, I mean, there are combo decks running around, and being able to hate out specific card name from all of your opponent's zones is the real kind of like home run against certain decks. I don't know if that's the case here, although obviously it's sort of like a extraction type situation. You can justify it in nearly any matchup. I'm looking at the Filigree Silex, though. Ways to sweep away mass permanence against a deck that plays wide and cheap like Orzhov Pixie can be very powerful. You obviously don't want those things sitting around, because even though Hopeless Nightmare might not have a lot of useful text while it's in play, the way that it interacts with Temporary Lockdown and the bounce cards means you'd rather not leave it around. It's sort of like an armed mine. Really interesting here. We'll have a squiz over at the Orzhov Pixie list as well. And what are we thinking here? I'm thinking Beza coming in really to mitigate in the mid game. Yeah, it's interesting. Also, Pixie actually does not have all of its copies of the Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber room in the main deck. There's one in the side. So I feel like a couple of these sideboard, like chunky threats, Beza the Bounding Spring, obviously great when your opponent is discarding you. Sheoldred the Apocalypse, a copy of your own, wouldn't hurt to bring in. You're just trying to bring in more high value cards, because there's just a lot of 1-for-1 going on. So you'd rather that when you eventually get down to your last card, that it be something that can really close the game on its own. I don't know if many of the more tech type cards like Kutzil's Flanker are going to be super relevant here. The graveyard effects in either deck are not central, I'd say, but you could bring in some of the splash removal. It is one of those sideboards here for the Orzhov Pixie deck that's a lot of 1 and 2 ofs. Honestly, like there's some cards in here as well. Day of Judgment, I'd leave that out. No need to bring that in. This is
that
not
destroys a demon, though.
Just look, in this matchup, there's actually many things that destroy a demon, thankfully.
Ah, okay. Well, yeah, exactly. It's the point you brought up in the last round. It's not just can this card be applicable against my opponent. It's, is it actually better than what I have in my deck? And once again, the Orzhov Pixie list, you've kind of got a little engine that you need to be aware of. You don't want to break down your own card, like ripping out parts to bring in just stuff to spite your opponent. I think both these players are going to be pretty confident in how they sideboard here. A couple of key changes and mostly just run it back, because that was such a close game 1, right? They probably both felt like they could have won. It was really neck and neck. Again, we were watching these life totals go up and down the whole time. There was never really a moment, I think, except towards like the literal very, very end, where I felt like anyone had a firm grasp on the win. I would be lying if I said that I didn't go to call the match a couple of different times and I go, actually, that's he found another demon, so back up to 10 life all of a sudden out of nowhere. Exactly. Again, like we had that whole swing, Magnus on 1, Sam on 15, and then out of nowhere, Magnus back up to 8. Really interesting match here between these two decks. Really interesting as well, because these are not outwardly aggressive decks. No, and exactly. And granted, maybe the pace felt a bit faster because they both sort of play at the same pace. You're not really contrasting one of these against the Gruul Mice deck or something, which is trying to explode on turn 2 or 3. But they still take chunks out of opponents' lives. Again, it's interesting the way that the Unholy Annex makes the impact from swinging the board control. Like, one removal spell doesn't just take out your opponent's best threat and lead to damage down the line. It's like, I kill your demon, I hit you for 6 with my demon in the air, then you take another 4 direct damage in my insect, which is actually an 8 life swing. And it's like, what happened? He had 15 life a turn ago. Exactly. Well, interesting as well, like, partway through the game, we were down to, 16 and 12, and that had been no combat damage at all. That was just
Unholy Annex triggers and Hopeless Nightmares. So it really speaks to the kind of hidden power of Orzhov Pixie, is the ability to really drain your opponent out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's a draining deck for the opponent, for the pilot in some cases, but it's good to see both these players, Sam and Magnus, having a laugh between games and staying in good spirits. They've obviously got a long match left to play. And if you're just joining us, by the way, we're here after game 1 of round 3 of Standard here at RC9 in Melbourne, Australia. It's really cool to see these players coming down to Melbourne, to the Town Hall in Coburg from all across, Australia's cities. We've got Elemental Arcade Central Coast versus Vault Game Brisbane here, if you're looking at where these players qualified from. So either they traveled a long way to qualify for the event, or they've traveled a long way to cash in that qualification. And here they are on the main stage in the feature match area. I mean, one of them won't be undefeated after this round, but both off to a hot start.
Looks like as well, I believe Sam's taken a mulligan for this one.
Okay. I mean, these are decks, would you say they mulligan well, either of these decks?
I think it's really difficult. I think there are instances in which I'm confused to say, I think there are instances in which Orzhov Pixie really okay. And in game 2 especially, I would say you'd want to have it to rest in hand just to see exactly what we're working with here. Really interesting hand from Magnus here. 2 lands, go for the throat, cut down, and 2 Carsey Revenant. Bit of a repetitive hand, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, again, these are mid-range decks, so it's not as clear-cut. They're also like, oh, I found a combo piece. This is the one. I have to get it. But that makes the duress decisions almost more interesting. It's almost one of those cases where I'm happier just to have seen my opponent's hand with the duress than to take a specific card. Although, go to the throat, that's one more demon you get to keep around potentially. It's good to start whittling away those answers because these players are probably going to exhaust their hands many times over before the match swings one way or the other. It's going to be hard for one of them to really steal a game from the other one unless there's a kind of terrible mulligan scenario happening. And both players seem to have avoided that so far. You see early Soulstone Sanctuary there for Magnus. Sam Lewin has his Colors of Mana available. And this is a card we did not see early on in the previous game. The Carsey Revenant showing up again here. Is this likely to be able to set the tone differently now that Magnus has it on curve?
I think it's going to put Magnus in a much better position. Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink. What an amazing set of keywords.
Music
on
to my
this.
ears.
It's a really good, and already Sam's got nothing on board currently. This already is going to be a 3-point life total swing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see a deck that has as many cheap cards as Orzhov Pixie just leaving mana open, especially because it doesn't really play that many instances. I think there's 3 in the main board, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Sam is just bricked the hand, right? Because of the interaction between your cards and the amount of removal in Magnus's deck, Sam could just be kind of saving pieces so that you can play them out together and try and chain the effects for more value.
See, and what I'm so interested here is I would have expected Sam Lewin to have had a nowhere to run in hand to answer that Carsey Revenant pretty handily, but no action, not a flinch from Sam Lewin.
Whoa. Oh.
Here comes the Sun Pearl Kieran instead.
So obviously we can't see the player's hands right now, especially Sam's. What does that say to you that you're willing to just run out a Sun Pearl as, I guess, just a small flying blocker here?
I think it puts Sam in a really precarious position. We've got a Momentum Breaker coming down, and that's going to handle one of the Carsey Revenants. But I think it signals Sam not having the best hand.
I mean, I'm trying to play whatever the Angel's advocate, I suppose, thinking of the best case scenario for Sam, right? The fact that you have the Sun Pearl Kieran in hand, you play it out without bouncing something back, right? Especially for this deck, you're so focused on that ability to reset a permanent to your hand like Momentum Breaker. Typically, you think that if you play out the Kieran and you don't return something, it's because you have nothing to return. But clearly, that card was available unless it was just peeled off the top. So perhaps it's a case where Sam has kind of a glut of maybe a lot of those self-bounced creatures in hand, or you need to hold up an instant and you're okay just developing your board a little bit, because I guess these Revenants, they're setting the tempo for a faster game, and Sam is forced to respond by playing cards out for not their optimum value. Still, though, not like the kind of massive life total disparity you would be afraid of, if you're Sam. You're going to have time to play some more cards and catch back up.
Magnus as well puts down a Preacher of the Schism. Now, what I would have expected from Sam with that play of Sun Pearl Kieran into Momentum Breaker is leading into some kind of temporary lockdown effect. Temporary lockdown in this deck, you can generate somewhat of an infinite loop, not quite infinite. You need to have the mana available, but of bouncing Sun Pearl Kieran and then potentially the card that makes the name of Nurturing Pixie back into your hand over and over, and just, profiting off of those ETB effects.
Yeah, so it's not infinite in the sense of it doesn't happen and win the game on the spot.
Yeah.
But if your deck doesn't present a lot of burst damage, it's very difficult to outgrind. How much does that affect how Magnus plays the deck? Do you just sort of play as normal and hope you go under that, or are you having to kind of change the way you use your removal to break it up?
It's really interesting, and we can see here we've got the Defiled Crypt in the Cadaver Lab room
Ooh.
being brought in from Sam.
I love that. I thought that sideboard deck might have actually kind of gone the way of the Dodo. It's been a while since at least the Espelis was playing it, but it's really cool to see it here in such a grindy matchup in particular. I must have missed it before going over those sideboards. How exactly is this going to change things?
Well, what it allows Sam to do here is he was able to get one of those cards out of the graveyard, able to rescue the Sun Pearl Kyrian, but unfortunately we're going to just put it under a Soulstone Sanctuary.
Rescue, save, but perhaps only for later.
Yes. The life total swings here are really heavily favored for Magnus, and then here comes a Deep Cavern Bat wanting to have a peek, and we'll get to see. Seeing the Sarah Paragon, that explains why exactly we're okay putting these cards in the graveyard.
And
Sarah Paragon really going to allow you to replay those cards for extra value.
Yeah, that's a pretty devastating blow, right? Because it seemed, if we're prepared to say that Sam's earlier sequencing was kind of hedging on that Paragon being able to get some value and recur cards, I mean, I suppose you could get it back from the bat later. It's not at least permanently exiled, but now what do you do?
We're definitely in a bit of a pickle here for Sam.
You can unlock the other side, I suppose, of the room and pick up your Kyrian anyway. So you do at least have a backup plan as far as that goes. You get some value, but this is a nice, reassuring card to see in almost any situation, right? This is like the heart of mid-range in current standard. Preacher of the Schism.
Really going to be important for Sam here. It's going to be able to give him those 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, and that's going to be important here. Sam at half of Magnus's life total, less than half, really.
It's so crazy to see how different this game is from game one and how it played out. Like, I think by this point in game one, we'd already seen 3 out of 4 momentum breakers and 6 out of 8 total unholy annex, or 6 out of 7 annexes. This game, you know, neither of those cards really making an appearance, and perhaps as a result, Magnus faring much better, just beating down right now.
Magnus as well going to use the Renew ability on that Carsey Revenant, on the Preacher of the Schism and Soulstone Sanctuary. So Magnus is pushing hard right now against Sam. And Sam really struggling to get the bounce engine of the Orzhov Pixie deck online.
Yeah, I guess this is the problem when you take mulligans as this deck, right? Is that like the cards on their own are some of the weakest that you can get away with playing in current standard. These are real incremental effects, and you need a certain weight of them, a certain critical mass to get going. Magnus's deck, not so. That's more traditional mid-range. Every card is pretty gas on its own, and you can see that, especially even the bat, the smallest creature, arguably having the largest impact, not only by taking the Paragon, but by just giving you the green light to say, this is your window to push.
Really crazy swing here towards Magnus. It doesn't even feel like we're watching the same match.
No, almost 2 different decks, and certainly this is a matchup, if these were different decks that Magnus would choose to play, if there is a game 3, because right now he is on the brink of forcing one. Again, the damage, not explosive, but almost inevitable at this point. Sam really needs some strong top decks, but what cards exactly are best at bailing you out of this situation? Because even the temporary lockdown won't fully clear this up, right?
Temporary Lockdown barely deals with Magnus's board because of that Preacher of the Schism, and that's going to be one of your really dangerous cards here to go against. We've got a little bit of a blocker, but unfortunately with the Renew ability from the Carsey Revenant, you're put in a position where you can't do too much blocking. I
mean, there is the situation, you've got the Momentum Breaker. We talked in game 1, that card was critical for its ability to gain life. It'll be the same here, although without the ability to push damage, that maximum speed is limited, which is maybe why, or part of why, we see Sam making an attack here. You will still have the same number of blockers, and that's a huge draw, one of those sideboard cards we mentioned earlier.
Amazing to see Sheoldred the Apocalypse, one of the triumphs of Standard for the last few years. Sheoldred almost always making an appearance in one way or another. This is going to really help Sam mitigate some of that life loss. And as well, with the Preacher of the Schism, every time Magnus draws a card, he's going to lose even more life off of this Sheoldred triggers. Magnus isn't exactly wanting for life at this point. He's got a little bit to work with right now, but it's going to have to force some difficult decisions, because if he throws down an Unholy Annex, uh-oh, that's a few extra cards drawn.
Yeah, it's crazy how much this card, like, it's not that the Sheoldred looks like a bad card on its surface, but it changes the texture of so many matchups, and this one maybe more than any other, that there's so many cards in the deck who get completely reevaluated when either player has this legend in play.
Wondering if Magnus has a response to the Sheoldred in this moment. Lauren going under a Deep Cavern Bat. Lauren, unfortunately, really not putting in a lot of work right now. We haven't seen any Unholy Annexes from Magnus.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can't really necessarily call it strategic or call it an error on Sam's part, but it's funny to see this card. It's normally quite quite powerful in this matchup, just kind of being left to rot in hand and eventually being discarded in both games because there hasn't been an opportune moment to play it for one reason or another. Although, even though that would obviously be another nice piece of synergy with Sheoldred when you're trying to dig your way out of a life hole, Magnus understanding with Sheoldred in play, there's more imperative than ever to get in, and that litany of keywords provided by the Kasi Revenants, even after their death, is maybe going to get Magnus over the line.
Sam as well looking as though he's contemplating activating the Restless Fortress just to push some of that extra life gain, because that's going to be, you're going to gain 2 and drain 2.
No.
And we're picking it up. That's going to be a win for Magnus Mungo in this round, and we're headed to game 3.
Wow, what a thrilling end. I really thought that Sam actually maybe had a last chance to stabilize there, maybe a breath of hope from that Sheoldred, but it was too little too late, I suppose. And maybe you can hope a bit of foreshadowing for game 3, but that was the strength of the mono black deck on display right there. Discard into pressure, seizing your windows to attack whenever they come in the game, and I'm so glad we get a third matchup between these two decks.
Those first 2 Kasi Revenants really set the tone for this match, because that was an immediate on, turn 4, a 6-point life total swing between the 2 players here. That was really important. And interestingly, I thought the decision initially from Sam when we had that turn 1 duress to take the cut down, to go for the throw instead of the cut down, giving Magnus a more efficient removal, knowing that a lot of the cards in Sam's decks fall to cut down.
It's interesting, right? Because I guess you're saying to yourself then, well, if both of these removal spells kill my small creatures, but if I get a big creature, then at least I've got a bullet there. I can take away the one removal spell that currently answers it. Maybe I can steal a march, but perhaps just after game 1 went so long, you don't have it in mind. What if my opponent beats me down with 3 drops? And then even after you deal with those 3 drops, you can't really cleanly answer them because that renew ability ended up basically winning the game for Magnus.
What are we looking for as we head into game 3 here? This is the pivotal match between these 2 players. We'll see one player into a 3-0 slot.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a huge start, right? Going into lunch undefeated would feel fantastic for either player, but I'm not really sure what to expect because we saw kind of night and day, 2 completely different matches, game 1 and 2. I guess maybe Magnus is saying, no, that game 2 is actually more of what my deck's about, right? Because if you look at the 2 decks, this one definitely has more potential to set the tempo higher, right? We didn't really see Archfiend of the Dross other than a brief cameo in game 1, but one of those on curve after a Deep Cavern Bat and a Kasi Revenant could put a ton of pressure on Sam's decks, right? Like, how many ways does the Pixie deck have to deal with things that are too big to get swept up by temporary lockdown?
One of the issues actually with Sam Lewin's deck is the temporary lockdown is for me, not for thee, really.
Yeah.
The way that the deck tends to operate is not worrying about sweeping your opponent's cards under the temporary lockdown. It's really far more concerned with putting those high-value ETB effects under the temporary lockdown to benefit off of them coming back in. All right, and we've shuffled up.
Do you think either of these players would have taken the opportunity to change their sideboarding after game 2, or they're just fully confident their plan was correct and you just have to chalk it up to variance?
Wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of change here between games 2 and 3. Ultimately, though, you're in a position to understand what you need to do. And if you know what you need to do in game 2, then you surely need to know what to do in game 3.
Yeah, you've only had it reinforced. I guess the other question that comes to front of mind here, right, is you're thinking, how is this going to be different from game 2 for Sam? How much difference does being on the play make? It obviously makes some, but this isn't really an explosive aggro deck or explosive at all. Does it really give you that much advantage?
Sam being able to capitalize on being on the play here, I think could be really important. Whether you're able to get that turn 1 duress or that turn 1 hopeless nightmare off is going to be really important and put you in a strong position. But Sam here, Magnus is here, has taken a mulligan. Sam starting on Restless Fortress, and we've immediately already passed back.
I'm not going to say that the mulligan was responsible for that game 2 loss by Sam, but in a match with so many like 1-for-1s, as you said, the temporary lockdown even not really acting as a multi-card sweeper, being up a card at the start of the game on the play must feel pretty good, although this bat is going to bring you back down to earth, perhaps.
Really good for Magnus here to see what's in Sam's hand, because Magnus had to take a mulligan in this game 3, which is really not a position you want to be in going for game 3.
Sam taking a long pause before allowing Magnus to see his hand with the resolution of this bat trigger. So, no, okay.
Well, that to me would have either said some kind of removal, and we can see a get lost here, because that would have, you still would have seen the cards, but you wouldn't have taken one if you're Magnus. Magnus here with a kind of tough decision, I think. What are you taking in this position? We can see the Defiled Crypt in the Cadaver Lab, Preacher of the Schism, Sarah Paragon, Nurturing Pixie, and Caves of Koilos, that's what that was.
Yeah, it's interesting because you probably take the get lost, right? It's one of those things where the chalk action, right, is you take the removal spell, especially if there's only one, because otherwise your opponent can just kill the bat and get whatever back. But last game you won kind of on tempo, so there might have been some argument to say take the Preacher there because it's sort of the best creature that can be immediately played, or the Pixie because it unlocks so many other draws in the deck. But that hand, kind of like the first two games, we haven't really seen the Pixie shine. Doesn't seem like there's immediate profit for it to take in the hand there either, and so just taking the removal spell sets up Magnus to maybe press here. Great removal spell to have ready for that Preacher.
Anoint with Affliction. It's one of my favorite removal spells currently because it exiles. And I find exile removal so important in the current standard meta, not even just for various, small creatures or tokens, but what's so important is there's a lot of decks that are capitalizing off the graveyard. And so being able to remove that card from the game entirely ends up being really important.
Yeah, I when this card was printed, I admit, I thought, oh, okay, Fringe sideboard tech, perhaps. It was great and limited. But the number of death triggers even in South, the aggro decks want their creatures to die, not get exiled. The graveyard decks want their creatures to be able to be recurred. And, having these options wiped away by your, 2-mana instant speed as well. Even if you don't end up using the poison counters, don't know if I've ever seen that part of the card be relevant in Standard. It just gets this card there as a fully playable part of the list, and now we continue to see more very strong and playable black cards as a Preacher of the Schism enters the other side of the field. Magnus in a strong position even after that mulligan.
Sarah Paragon with an empty graveyard as well cannot feel good in this position. No ability to capitalize on any potential, Sun Pearl Kieran, Nurturing Pixie, Hopeless Nightmare. We do see a Momentum Breaker come down. Magnus with a tough decision of keeping the Get Lost, which will ultimately spell, defeat for his Preacher, or getting rid of the Preacher. And we're going to choose the Preacher and not give Sam access to the removal. Yeah,
this is definitely a standard meta where the tempo sometimes matters, but in this case, it's a slow enough game that you'd rather just keep that Get Lost under the bat for as long as possible. But now the pressure on resources continues to come from Sam, duressing the hand back and getting crucial information, although you don't love what you see here if you're Sam from Magnus. One land drop away from a Sheoldred.
I was actually going to say I'm a little bit comfortable in this position, knowing that it's going to take another land drop, but I would, Sam's making the decision I would make. I would take the Sheoldred's Edict, because the Nowhere to Run doesn't currently hit the Sarah Paragon, so you know that your creature is safe for the time being.
Feels great when you see the one relevant removal spell for especially such a key card as the Paragon. Admittedly, as you said, not doing a ton for Sam right now, but if that does get to stay in play, if there's a few more draws before another viable removal spell comes through, we could see it start to do something. As we, that hand before looked awkward, the pieces didn't quite line up, but now you have Momentum Breaker and the Pixie. So Pixie coming into play here as a 2/2 flyer, also resetting that Breaker. That'll be another discard, and Sam's starting to build some momentum. Even if you kill that Pixie now, you're just basically offering the opportunity to play it again if the Paragon remains in play.
Magnus with that 4th land drop off the top, choosing to sandbag the Sheoldred right now and instead play out the Karsi Revenant.
Yeah, this is where the matchup gets really interesting, right? Any black mid-range mirror, both players kind of have pretty good information about what their opponent's holding, not even just because, they're great Magic players and they understand each other's deck lists and have a bit of a hunch based on plays, but they've literally seen each other's hands at multiple points through the game.
Got a bit of a judge call at the minute here. How are we feeling about the current state of affairs?
Well, earlier on, I was prepared to say Magnus was making a remarkable recovery from that mulligan, but Sam, seemingly with that draw of Momentum Breaker, has really kind of sewn together some disparate pieces from the hand. I think we're just dealing with the fact this Pixie did not get a +1/+1 counter, but either way, I think this matchup is still looking to be in the balance. But Sam may be pulling ahead here, considering that Magnus doesn't feel safe playing out the Sheoldred. Obviously, the life totals are still high, but Sam has still action to play in the hand. I think that's what bogged him down in game 2, is just not a lot of profitable plays. Whereas here, it seems like the deck's starting to kind of do its thing.
Really important there, too. Magnus is threatening a cut down, choosing to play the Karsi Revenant, leave the Swamp untapped, threatening some kind of removal, because we know we've seen the Nowhere to Run, but nothing else could be in hand for 1 mana at this point because he didn't immediately duress, so we know that that's not a threat. Really interesting position to be in. We're fairly 50-50 right now. We've got 4 lands on both sides. We've got 2 creatures on both sides. We're at 18-18 in round 3. This is a fairly 50-50 match.
And it's not the fastest game, but because both players are kind of tight on resources, there's still very incremental decisions being made here. As you say, both players on 18 life, but we're really, pondering for a while over being able to represent a 1-mana removal spell on a 1-mana creature. Does Sarah Paragon being in play change whether or your eagerness to remove some of these threats?
I think it does. Sarah Paragon provides a bit of a problem for the Karsi Revenant, able to pretty productively block against the Karsi Revenant.
Yeah, okay, so we're still looking at whatever's going on here in this play. Magnus, just kind of thinking of whatever. I think the players are back to just considering the game state now. Looks like both of them are in good spirits still, which is nice. Yeah, okay, we're still, okay, the judge call is continuing, so we might come back to us, well, give these players and the judge times to sort things out, but at least they've left us in a pretty interesting kind of game state here, Kira. Game 3 obviously hanging the balance, tons on the line, and both players with limited resources in hand. I guess I would say, who is more likely to kind of break this open with the right top deck, do you think?
I still stand, this is such a 50-50 match right now. There really is so much ability for either player to pull ahead in this position. Whether it's whoever gets the Unholy Annex first and is able to start generating that extra card value, generate that extra card draw, it's going to be coming down to whoever has the best card on the top of their deck. And we all know top decking is a skill.
Yeah, exactly, especially against black, right? You can't duress the top of the deck, you can't Thoughtseize the top of the deck. So I actually kind of forgotten about Unholy Annex somehow after that crazy game one where both players had a ton of copies in play and we saw them gain and drain multiple tens of life from each other. It suddenly hasn't been a factor, and I guess that's the case when you're playing these black decks that don't really have a lot of card selection, really kind of break down each other's game plans, and you're just dealing with whatever resources are available to you. But, you know, I agree, and I think that even perhaps the mono black deck, maybe because of the way the matchup works, just has its cards feel like they're more relevant to this specific situation, whereas the Pixie deck, great against the field. We've seen lots of you know, elite players post results with this deck recently, but in this current matchup, it seems like Sam might be on the back foot unless that Paragon can start to creak out some great value.
We're going to need a few more cards in the graveyard before we really get to see the Sarah Paragon take over here. But importantly as well, Orzhov Pixie has a great matchup against Izzet Prowess, and we've seen plenty of Izzet Prowess in the field today. Something around 26% of the field, I believe, is currently represented by Izzet Prowess, and Orzhov Pixie has a monumental win rate over it.
Yeah, I understand that we haven't yet shown it on the feature match area, but don't worry, if you are one of those people out there, you're a huge Izzet Prowess fan, you love Corey Steelcutter, you're tuning in for that action, don't worry. By the end of today and tomorrow, you will have gotten your fill. But for now, we're focusing on these decks, the kind of diversity that Standard has to offer, and especially perhaps some of the final bosses those Izzet players might be running into in these temporary lockdown, you know, grindy, life gain capable decks. Speaking of the life gain, that's a nice thing for Sam to be able to recur, of course. The Pixie picking up that momentum break, likely the same copy coming down again, and finally getting back the get loss that time.
All right, we are back down to the table. We're in the end of round 3 here at RC9 Melbourne. Back at the table with Sam Lewin on Orzhov Pixie and Magnus Mungo on Mono Black Demons. This is still very much anyone's game. We're 1-1 here between these two players.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if you are just joining us, there's a lot on the line for these players. Clearly in round 3, there's still a ways to go. But both these players currently in the driver's seat to pick up, you know, a Worlds invite and a lion's share of $15,000 that awaits our winner. So, you know, no pressure, boys. Just make sure you close this one out clean, no misplays. And I mean, right now, either of them are still in a position to do it.
15,000 prize pool. What an amount. And again, Sam wondering as well whether or not to use that Get Lost when the Deep Cavern Bat comes down and it's back underneath the bat again.
I suppose if you committed to not playing it the first time, you're okay with it being taken a second time, but it is an interesting decision, right? Not one that I'm sure a lot of players are familiar with now. The bat's been around a while and you're kind of always going, do I just get it now and just use the removal spell? But even giving your opponent maps in a delicate game state like this might not be something you want to do without thinking about it.
All right, and the Pixie going to make a block against that Carsey Revenant. Really difficult to want to block with the Sarah Paragon because that Carsey Revenant has Flying, Lifelink, and Death Touch.
Yeah, at least this way, by blocking with something else, you give the Paragon the opportunity to bring back the Pixie. So, of course, you can't let the mere presence of the Paragon prevent you from even being proactive enough to attack. But you are giving this Pixie deck a chance to get the wheels grinding again, which is something Sam's really struggled to do, perhaps because of the hand attack of the black deck. And, okay, so you're able to duress away the other removal spell there. They're nowhere to run again, finding a bit of a lack of target so far in this game 3. Maybe not so sad to lose it, but it's still one more card. And now, crucially, setting you up to maybe have to discard the Sheoldred at some point.
Really difficult, though, with 2 creatures on the field. That Momentum Breaker is first going to eat a creature. But really importantly, we're seeing the Pixie deck come online and do what it does best, which is bouncing.
Yeah, I said at some point, because as you said, there's targets in play, right, to be gobbled up first. And you can see Magnus, of course, going to give up the Kasi Revenant again. That's a card to keep an eye on in the graveyard even. But Sam is now working on the plan a couple of turns ahead, it seems like. You can even potentially sacrifice a Momentum Breaker. Even if the life's not immediately relevant with the Paragon in play, it's a real value train, and you could start to chew away at Magnus's remaining resources.
And here it is off of the top.
Oh,
We've got an Unholy Annex from Magnus off of the top. Really important to the future of this game because we're getting down to only 2 cards in hand now.
Yeah, it's almost like Act 3 of the story. The hero's been absent for a while, away, training under the waterfall or something, and now, when it was most needed, Unholy Annex returned, and Magnus will not mind at all paying 2 life to draw cards in this situation. As we'd mentioned, the Pixie deck starting to pull ahead on card advantage, but now you have the engine in play, and suddenly the pressure's back on Sam.
Really difficult position for Sam as well. He can go ahead and take care of the Deep Cavern Bat, get the Get Lost, use that for the Shieldred. But importantly, this is just a difficult spot to be in now that your opponent is going to be the one with card advantage. Again, when this deck cares about discarding cards, really difficult when your opponent keeps drawing those dang cards.
Yeah, because neither of these decks... Oh, that's a nice draw to have as well there, as we see the Shieldred once again redeployed for Sam. Again, it's becoming more clear what axis you have to attack on, right, as Sam. Your opponent has the card advantage, and fair enough, good for them. You have board control right now, so if you're not going to be able to immediately remove that Annex, you might just start to pressure the life total and say, I'm not going to give you the time to use those cards, really see the benefit of that engine. Right now, can't even make the Demon token off of the Ritual Chamber, but now this is where Shieldred once again becomes so impactful for the millionth time in Standard since it was printed, and flips that Annex kind of all by itself.
Shieldred versus Shieldred, really important. And especially in this instance, it's important whose Shieldred triggers first.
Yeah, so would you like to take us through that as the Standard expert? I know this is an interaction that not everyone may be familiar with.
Sure, so what's going to be really difficult here is that I believe this is where layers come into effect as well.
I think, is active player, non-active player?
Oh, active player, non-active player is going to be really important here on who draws what when. And especially with that Unholy Annex, I do believe it triggers your opponent's Shieldred prior to yours.
Yeah, so AppNap order means that if you are drawing a card on your own turn, which is more usual, especially with these decks, no instant cantrips, your Shieldred will go on the stack and then your opponent's, which means you'll lose life before you gain life. So it's sort of like old Lifelink used to be. You can't just rely on the Shieldreds to, quote, cancel each other out. And I think actually it calls all the way back to the last Australian RC I commentated, which was a while ago. The grand final Pioneer Mirror came down to being able to reduce your opponent's life total and letting Shieldred trigger, but Sam going for a big swing right now where that amount of life may not matter and forced to chump block with Shieldred. I mean, the trade there, I guess, removes that scenario we were just talking about, but Sam's still in a great position, especially now.
Really amazing while we see the Cadaver Lab and Sam confidently happy to attack because that Cadaver Lab allows him to return a card from graveyard to his hand. He's going to pick up that Shieldred. Magnus really in a difficult position. Got that 5th land. We can activate the Ritual Chamber side of the Unholy Annex and get that Demon into play. But at this point, Sam's threatening to put that Shieldred down again, and that card draw is really going to hurt Magnus.
I'd hazard to say this is the worst situation we've seen either player in this entire best of 3 now. And Magnus, I mean, has fought bravely, made all the right decisions, but this Pixie deck finally, after 2 games of kind of like stuttering and spluttering, is seemingly put it all together in a chain of brilliant draws. And even this one-off out of the sideboard Defiled Crypt Cadaver Lab, as you said, revealed at the most devastating possible time right after that Shieldred trade. Magnus in a huge hole here. What can he have?
We can see a Shieldred's Edict in hand for Magnus, as well as a Go for the Throat. So we've got 2 different pieces of removal here, which is going to be really important for Magnus. One can hit the Sarah Paragon, one can hit the Shieldred, but the problem is we've still got 20 to 4 life total. Sam is back where he started, and Magnus is at the kind of dregs right now.
Kasi Revenant in hand as well, I think, representing a potential source of life gain, but the problem is the mana is not quite... Okay, the double spell potentially represented there. Go for the throat, taking out the Sarah Paragon. You'd love to have had that happen earlier on, just trying to reduce any amount of incoming damage right now, but there's still Pixie on board and your own Unholy Annex to worry about. A lot of pressure here. Can Sam close it out?
Looking like it might be a Restless Fortress activation as well for some of that gain and drain.
So many sources of life drain here, a life loss for Magnus potentially. It's hard to see a way out of it with just 3 mana available.
Well, this has been the most aggressive game that we've seen so far. That all-out swing from Sam was probably the most direct damage that has been dealt this entire time.
It's a real moment when you see your opponent turn Shieldred sideways. Like, their card's so capable of winning the game while just completely chilling at home in a chair that when they get aggressive with it, you have to feel your heart sink. And Magnus clearly, keeping mind in the game right now, but on the last legs here, potentially facing down 2-1, we activate that creature land. There's another removal spell.
Really importantly here, having to choose the function of sacrifice a non-token creature, which means that Sam has the option and chooses to destroy and sacrifice the Nurturing Pixie.
And that will be game, of course. We thought it might be the case, but Magnus playing it out to the very last. Sam, though, confidently closes things game 3. Bit of a scare there in game 2 for the Pixie deck, but able to secure the win there in the Battle of Black mid-range. What a fun match, Kira.
I love seeing Orzhov Pixie win in this position.
Yeah, absolutely great. And I hope both these players do go on. I think the Mono Black Demons deck has some real game in the meta. And yes, will be coming back to us now here.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What a match. I loved that. I love seeing Orzhov Pixie do well because it really attacks the meta on a different axis. A lot of that damage that we saw, all of that damage being chipped away, passive. Pretty passive, all things considered.
Well, game 3, a little less passive, kind of showing that you can still get in the red zone there. I mean, the Pixie's a 2-2 flyer for 1. You know, don't think about the rest of what goes into that bargain, but that deck really can turn the corner quickly and get aggressive. Once you start to build up that advantage, it kind of becomes more of an avalanche. The momentum builds, and that what ends up, turning the game in favor of the Pixie deck. We saw the Paragon come into play. I love all the one-offs showing up there for Sam, really kind of maybe previewing what that deck can do later on, because I feel like if you get over this matchup in a field so heavy on Is It Prowess, Kira, do you like the Pixie deck's chances of qualifying players into our finals tomorrow?
I love Orzhov Pixie's chances against Is It Prowess. Really great information came out showing about how aggressive Orzhov Pixie is against Is It Prowess. And here is our metagame breakdown here at RC9 in Melbourne. Look at that representation of Is It Prowess. And the reason that I say I love Pixie against this deck so much is some great information came out of the RCs in all of Bologna and Minneapolis. And Is It Prowess, do you know what the win rate against Pixie is for Is It Prowess?
I mean, for a deck that relies so much on, finite life totals and cheap creatures, I have to think it's pretty low, maybe 40%?
It is 39%.
Oh, actually, wow. I thought I was going to go low there, but that's crazy. As a matchup against a deck that's so much of the field, and potentially a lot of the day 2 field, I mean, someone like Sam, who's already 3-0 on the deck, must be really liking their choice.
And he's really happy as well to see that. Look at that representation of Is It Prowess. 59 players today on Is It Prowess, which is about 26% of the field, a little bit lower than some of the other events that we've been seeing. Similar to, as I said, RC Bologna and RC Minneapolis saw a 33% representation of Is It Prowess. So seeing a little bit of a dip here in favor of decks like Jeskai Oculus and Jeskai Control.
Yeah, we obviously don't have time to talk through all these decks in detail here, Kira, but in your opinion, obviously, Is It Prowess the deck to beat? Pixie, arguably the deck to beat it. What makes you as a player go with something else, if not one of those two?
I think you're looking, especially, you can see here this red and red X aggro, going fast. If you can go fast and you can go over the top of either of these decks, it puts you in a really favorable position. And so, of course, as you said, it's what decks go over the top of each other. How are we layering our wins here? And again, amazing result from Sam Lewin, 3-0 into our lunch break now. And we'll be back for round 4.